Captain's Log, Stardate 4-2401.4. We were deep in the Draken Nebula, that vast, slow-swirling veil of ionized plasma and gases that clings to the edge of Klingon space like a half-forgotten memory. The Penrose, Galaxy class, steady as ever, had been assigned a week of routine training exercises. Nothing glamorous. Sensor recalibrations, shuttle flight drills, the kind of meditative work that lets a crew breathe after the last patrol along the Romulan neutral zone. The nebula's charged particles played havoc with long-range scans, but that was precisely why Starfleet chose it. A perfect classroom for learning to trust instruments when the universe itself seemed to whisper static across every frequency. I sat in my ready room, the soft amber glow of the desk lamp reflecting off the polished bulkhead, a half-empty mug of Daqtagh cold beside the pad. Executive Officer Gustavo Arau, Gus, had the con on the bridge, his calm voice occasionally filtering through the intercom as he walked the crew through another calibration cycle. Chief Engineer Maximilian von Roeder was down in engineering, his German-accented mutterings about these infernal plasma phantoms, a comforting background hum. Navi, our Vulcan operations officer, monitored the science stations with her usual quiet precision. Everything felt right, contemplative. Then the shuttle call came. Lieutenant Marcus Davidson, our tactical specialist on detached duty for this exercise, piloted shuttlecraft Pequod with Ensign Alex Rivera, fresh out of the academy, riding shotgun. Their voices crackled over the comm. "Calm. Penrose, this is Pequod. We've got visual confirmation on a Klingon vessel, decloaked, holding station at the nebula's inner edge. Looks like a Klingon Bird of Prey. Designate IKS Daqtagh. No hostile emissions, but they're running active weapons diagnostics. Heavy power fluctuations from their forward torpedo launcher." I leaned forward, the chair creaking softly under me. "Acknowledged, Pequod. Maintain distance. Record everything, but do not hail unless they initiate. If they request assistance, patch it straight to me." A pause. I could almost see Mark David's steady hands on the controls, Rivera's wide eyes taking in her first real border encounter. "And Mr. Davidson, keep it casual. We're allies, not spectators at a gladiatorial match." McMurray out. Starfleet's standing orders were clear. Observe. Do not interfere. The Khitomer Accords had held for decades now, forged in the fires of shared battles against the Borg and the Dominion's shadow. But Klingons tested new weapons in places like this for a reason. Remote, unpredictable, far from prying eyes. Still, something in the energy signatures Na'vi flagged on the main viewer felt off. A little too urgent, a little too raw. What followed, pieced together from our long-range sensor logs, the faint bleed of their unencrypted command chatter. Klingons rarely bother with full encryption during internal tests, and the universal translator's patient rendering of their guttural speech became the substance of this log. A slow unfolding drama aboard the IKS Daqtagh that reminded me how thin the line can be between honor and catastrophe. On the bridge of the IKS Daqtagh, the lights were low, the way Klingons prefer them, deep crimson and amber hues that made every ridged forehead look carved from Kono's stone. Captain Kavost sat in the central command chair, his heavy frame filling the scarred leather, one hand resting on the polished batleth hilt mounted beside him. The view screen dominated the forward bulkhead, curved like the wings of the great raptor the ship was named for, displaying the Draken Nebula's slow, hypnotic churn. Violet plasma tendrils laced with green ionized streamers, beautiful and treacherous. The hum of the warp core vibrated faintly through the deck plates, a living heartbeat. Disruptor banks on the wingtips idled with a low, predatory growl. Photon torpedo tubes forward and aft stood ready, their magnetic containment fields whispering. Kavost was not the captain the crew had expected. He had been appointed through the subtle machinations of his mate's house, connections high on the Klingon High Council, where political favor still moved like blood wine through veins. His predecessor, Commander Morak, had been the natural choice, a battle-scarred veteran who placed the crew's morale and the ship's safety above the Empire's endless thirst for glory. Morak still served as executive officer, standing now at the tactical station, arms crossed, his scarred face impassive. But the tension between them was palpable, a low current beneath every order. The launch from Konos weeks earlier had been plagued by ill omens, the kind warriors mutter about over tankards, but never voice on the bridge. The ceremonial smashing of the blade against the Daqtagh's hull, meant to christen her for this test mission, had failed. Instead of shattering, as is the tradition, the heavy blade fell to the walkway with a loud clang. Murmurs had rippled through the assembled warriors on the landing pad. "The spirits are restless," one had growled. Kavost had ignored it, of course. Glory waited for no omens. Worse followed. Their chief medical officer, a gruff old surgeon named Dr. Rag, had been killed in a senseless ground accident on the way to the shuttle bay, a malfunction involving a cargo transport in the crowded streets of the first city, crushed beneath its repulsors. No time for proper rites. The replacement medic was young, barely blooded. The crew took it as another sign. Then, only hours into the voyage, Kavost had discovered the reactor oversight officer, Lieutenant Gorth, slumped at his console in the engineering alcove off the bridge, reeking of blood wine, eyes half closed in a stupor. The man had been asleep on duty, the warp core's matter-antimatter intermix ratios drifting dangerously. Kavost had risen from his chair like a storm, voice booming across the bridge. "You disgrace the Empire and this ship. You are relieved permanently. Security, escort this paytalk to the brig. His honor is forfeit." Gorth had protested, but weakly. Morak had said nothing, though his jaw tightened. The replacement arrived by transporter from a nearby outpost, Ensign Radek, fresh from the Imperial Academy on Konos, wide-eyed and eager, his uniform still crisp. He took the station with trembling hands, but determination in his ridges. The mission itself was straightforward in Klingon terms. Test fire their new experimental weapon, the Daqtagh-class warp-breaker torpedo, a prototype born of House Kavost's political patronage and the Empire's constant hunger for advantage. Unlike standard photon torpedoes, this one was engineered to sustain independent warp velocities, streaking after targets at warp 8 or better, then deploying a focused tachyon gravitic pulse that could collapse an enemy vessel's warp field entirely, ripping them out of warp, leaving them helpless, shields flickering, engines crying in subspace. Perfect for interdicting fleeing foes or preventing reinforcements. The Draken Nebula had been chosen precisely because its plasma turbulence would simulate the worst combat conditions, sensor blackout, warp field distortion, the very chaos the weapon would need to overcome. Kavost had briefed the senior staff in the war room the night before, voice low and fervent. "This torpedo will make the Daqtagh the terror of the neutral zone. No vessel will escape us once locked. We fire it today, and the High Council will sing our names in the Hall of Heroes." Morak had listened, then spoken quietly once the others left. "Captain, the crew is solid, but they are not pawns for your house's glory. Honor demands we return them alive so that they might fight and die in a day of glory. Loss of a warrior for a mere test would be cause for ridicule." Kavost had waved it off. "Honor is won in the fire, Commander, not in the comfort of the fire pit." Now, as the Daqtagh held position at the nebula's fringe, the view screen showed the plasma thickening ahead, dense banks of charged gas that played havoc with targeting scanners and threatened to destabilize the torpedo's warp sustainer coils. The experimental weapon required a clear firing lane, or the risk of premature detonation was too great. Kavost studied the readings on the arm of his chair, the glow casting harsh shadows across his face. "Helm," he rumbled, "bring us to 1/4 impulse. Tactical, load forward photon torpedo. We will clear a path through that plasma bank. A single burst should disperse it enough for the test." Morak stepped forward, voice measured but edged with warning. "Captain, the gases are highly volatile. A photon detonation could trigger secondary ion cascades. The feedback might stress the forward disruptor arrays or even the port wing structural integrity. The ship was not built for this kind of close-range plasma work. We risk damage before the real test has even begun." The bridge fell quiet. Ensign Radek at the engineering station glanced up, eyes wide. The helmsman's hands hovered over his controls. Kavost rose slowly, the chair sighing as it released him. He turned to face his XO, the two warriors locking eyes, old comrade and new master. "And if we wait for perfect conditions, Commander, the weapon remains unproven. The Empire does not reward caution, it rewards victory. Fire the torpedo." Morak's ridges tightened, but he gave a curt nod and returned to his station. "Aye, Captain. Torpedo loaded and targeted. Firing on your mark." Kavost settled back into the chair, gesturing his hand forward. The view screen zoomed on the swirling violet wall ahead. The torpedo tube hummed to life. A single, sleek projectile lanced out, brilliant white against the nebula's haze, streaking into the plasma. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then the detonation bloomed, a brilliant sphere of plasma fire that rippled outward, ionizing gas in a violent cascade. The Daqtagh shuddered as the shockwave reached them, deck plates vibrating, consoles flickering. Alarms chirped softly. A conduit in the overhead sparked once, then died. Minor hull stress readings climbed on the port wing, but the ship held. The forward view screen cleared just enough. A ragged corridor of calmer space now yawned open, the nebula's interference reduced. "Damage report," Kavost demanded, voice steady. "Minor buckling on the port wing pylon," Morak reported, fingers dancing over his panel. "Disruptor bank 2 at 94%. No breaches. Engineering teams already en route." Kavost allowed himself the ghost of a smile. "See? The spirits test us, but we prevail. Helm, take us into the cleared lane. Ensign Radek, confirm the warp breaker is armed and its warp sustainer online." The young officer's voice cracked only slightly. "Confirmed, Captain. Torpedo loaded in Tube 1. Targeting scanners. Recalibrating. Warp interdictor field generators green." The bridge crew shifted, a low growl of anticipation rippling through them. Warriors checked their stations with renewed purpose. The nebula's glow painted their faces in shifting violet and green. The Daqtagh eased forward, wings steady, the hum of her engines deepening as she positioned for the true test. On the Penrose, our sensors registered the detonation clearly, bright enough that Davidson reported a visible flash even from our safe distance. I ordered the P-Quad to hold position and continue passive recording. No hails. Not yet. Captain Kavost leaned forward in his chair, eyes fixed on the view screen where the experimental torpedo's targeting reticle now glowed steadily over the heart of the cleared plasma. The moment had come. The weapon that could change the face of interstellar conflict waited in its tube, its warp coils already beginning their subtle thrum. "Prepare to fire the warp breaker torpedo," he growled, the words heavy with promise and peril. Captain's log. Supplemental. The nebula still whispered around us, its ionized tendrils brushing our deflector shields like restless ghosts. Lieutenant Davidson's shuttle had relayed the flash of the Klingon torpedo detonation clearly enough for our science stations to log every spectral line. Navi reported the warp breaker's tachyon signature spiking into the high gamma range before it vanished into its own warp envelope. Whatever the Daqtagh was testing, it had worked, at least for a moment. Then the energy bleed began. Our long-range sensors caught the first anomaly in their power grid, a sharp spike in plasma temperature near what we identified as their main reactor manifold. I ordered passive observation only. Klingon pride runs deeper than any coolant line, and Starfleet doctrine is clear. Still, I kept the channel open to the Pequod. If they asked, we would answer. If they did not, we would bear witness. On the bridge of the IKS Daqtagh, the moment of triumph was brief. Captain Qvost's fist clenched on the arm of the command chair as the experimental torpedo streaked away. The warp breaker left the forward tube with a low, resonant thrum that vibrated through every deck plate, deeper than any standard photon, because this one carried its own miniaturized MA reactor and a pair of compact warp coils tuned to sustain independent flight at warp 7.8. The Klingon Bird of Prey was built for exactly this kind of brutal efficiency. At 678 meters from beak to tail, she dwarfed the smaller Burrell-class scouts. Her wings housed the primary warp coils themselves rather than separate nacelles, feeding directly from the central reactor pit, buried in the thick neck section between the forward command module and the massive aft engineering hull. Plasma conduits ran the length of those wings like arteries, powering the twin forward disruptor cannons mounted at the wingtips and the secondary banks at their roots. The design philosophy was pure Klingon, rugged, overbuilt, and deliberately light on redundant safety systems. Honor demanded you fight with what the Empire gave you, not with what cowards might wish for. "Torpedo away," Ensign Radek called from the engineering station, voice tight with excitement. "Warp sustainer online. Interdictor field generator green. She's accelerating. Mark 9.2. Now 9.6. The view screen tracked the weapon as a brilliant white needle slicing through the cleared plasma corridor. For 3 heartbeats it held course, then the tachyon gravitic pulse blossomed, a silent sphere of distorted space that would have yanked any starship within 5,000 kilometers out of warp and left its coils screaming. Simulated target buoys the Daqtagh had deployed earlier registered the effect perfectly. Cheers erupted across the bridge, deep guttural roars of victory. Qvost allowed himself a predatory grin, ridges catching the crimson bridge lighting. Then the deck lurched. A deep, metallic crack echoed up from below decks, followed by the unmistakable shriek of superheated plasma venting into an access crawlway. Red emergency lights flared across every console. Alarms howled in the harsh, guttural Klingon tongue. "Report," Qvost barked. Morak's fingers flew over the tactical panel, his scarred face hardening. Primary plasma coolant conduit rupture, starboard wing root manifold. The warp breaker's power draw combined with the earlier photon blast. Feedback overloaded the line. Containment at 73% and falling. Reactor temperature climbing. 412 kelvins and rising. Qvost was already on his feet. The Daqtagh's matter-antimatter core was a rugged beast, housed in a reinforced pit that could shrug off direct hits from most disruptors, but its coolant system had always been the weak point. No fancy Federation-style multiple redundant loops here, just a single high-capacity plasma coolant circuit fed by tritium intermix regulators. The engineers on Konos had insisted it was sufficient for normal operations. No one had planned for an experimental torpedo that pulled twice the expected load while still inside the nebula's ionic soup. "Insert emergency control rods," Qvost ordered. "All stop on impulse. Shut down non-essential systems. Life support to auxiliary only." Radek's hands shook only slightly as he keyed the sequence. Heavy duranium rods slid into the dilithium matrix with a series of dull thunks felt through the deck. The warp core's deep bass note dropped half an octave, but the temperature continued its merciless climb. The backup coolant pumps, sparse by design, had never been installed on this particular ship. House Qvost had accepted the risk in exchange for faster production and heavier disruptor banks. Klingon engineering. Fight harder, not safer. Temperature now 480 kelvins, Morak said quietly. "We have perhaps 12 minutes before the core breaches." Qvost turned to the communication station. open a channel to High Command on Konos. Priority 1. Inform them we require a heavy tug and medical support. The comms officer growled in frustration. Antenna array is offline, Captain. The plasma feedback from the first photon detonation must have sheared the primary relay. Long range is dead. Short range only. Line of sight. Kvost's fist struck the chair arm hard enough to dent the metal. The earlier clearing shot, the one Morak had warned against, had come back to bite them after all. The Daqtagh was now blind and mute beyond visual range, drifting in the nebula's outer veil with a reactor slowly cooking itself from the inside. Engineering, rig a makeshift coolant loop, Kvost ordered, voice steady as forged batleth steel. Use the auxiliary plasma vents and the reserve deuterium tanks. I want that core temperature down before it cooks the warheads in the torpedo bay. Chief Engineer Qapla, broad-shouldered, graying ridges, a veteran of a dozen border skirmishes, acknowledged from the intercom with a single terse Qapla. Within moments, the first repair team was moving, 4 warriors in heavy radiation suits, tools clanging, crawling into the narrow access tubes that ran alongside the wing route conduits. Klingon ships were never built for comfort. The crawlways were tight, dark, and lined with exposed EPS relays that hummed like angry targs. The bridge fell into a tense, rhythmic silence, broken only by the steady climb of the temperature display. Minutes passed like hours. Then the first team staggered out of the access hatch on Deck 7, helmets off, faces slick with sweat and something darker. One warrior vomited violently across the deck grating. Another's hands were already blistering, the tough Klingon hide bubbling where the radiation had burned through the suit seals. The makeshift coolant line had held for 6 minutes, long enough to drop the core temperature by 40 kelvins. But the dose they had taken was lethal. Second team, Qapla's voice rasped over the comm. Move. They went in, then the third. Each shift lasted no more than 4 minutes. Any longer, and even Klingon physiology, hardier than most species, resistant to extremes that would kill a human in seconds, would collapse. The second team emerged coughing blood, eyes bloodshot, but they had sealed another section of the ruptured conduit. The third team, led by the burly crew chief Daqtagh himself, finished the bypass. The core temperature finally peaked and began a slow, grudging descent toward stability. But the damage was done. Radiation levels across the forward sections were climbing steadily. The entire engineering neck of the ship was now a slow cooker of gamma and neutron flux. Kvost ordered all non-essential personnel to the outer wing compartments and the aft cargo bays, areas shielded by thicker hull plating and farther from the reactor pit. Warriors moved with grim discipline, carrying the worst of the injured on stretchers fashioned from cargo webbing. The air recyclers struggled to scrub the faint metallic tang of irradiated steam that had already begun leaking into the ventilation. Ensign Radek stood at his station, staring at the readouts, then at the first team still retching in the corner of the bridge. The young officer's ridges had gone pale. When Daqtagh called for a volunteer to make one final adjustment inside the hottest crawlway, Radek froze. His mouth opened, closed. The words would not come. Daqtagh spat on the deck. "I'll go myself, then. The boy's not ready for the fire." The crew chief vanished into the access tube alone. On the Penrose, Lieutenant Davidson's voice crackled across the secure channel. "Captain McMurray, the Daqtagh's venting plasma. Radiation signature is spiking. They're in trouble. Request permission to offer assistance." I studied the tactical plot. The Pequod hovered at the edge of visual range, Ensign Rivera's face tight with concern on the split screen. "Negative, Lieutenant," I said carefully. "Hail them once. Offer aid under the Kidamur protocols. If they refuse, do not press. Relay everything to Starfleet Command, but stay clear. We do not force help on Klingons. Not today." Mark David acknowledged. The shuttle's running lights flashed once in the nebula's haze as they transmitted the offer. The reply came back almost instantly. Audio only. Kvost's voice raw with defiance. "This is Captain Kvost of the IKS Daqtagh. We require no Federation charity. Return to your training exercises and leave warriors to their work. Daqtagh out." Pequod held position, recording. Back aboard the Daqtagh, the situation worsened again. The makeshift coolant line, hastily welded from spare deuterium feed tubing and reinforced with emergency force field patches, began to weep superheated plasma once more. Temperature crept upward. Worse, residual heat had ignited a small fire in the forward torpedo bay where the experimental warp breaker's launch had left microfractures in the propellant casing. Flames licked at the warhead racks. Kvost ordered the suppression system armed, but Morak stepped forward, voice low and urgent. "Activating that will flood the compartment with halon gas, Captain. It will kill anyone still inside." Kvost's eyes narrowed, but the fire was spreading. Morak did not wait for permission. He grabbed 2 warriors and a portable extinguisher, leading them personally into the smoke-filled bay. They fought the flames hand to hand, Klingon style, beating them back with the sheer force of will and heavy gloves, dragging burning debris clear while the bulkheads glowed cherry red. The fire was contained, but Morak's uniform was scorched, his left arm blistered. Radiation continued to spread. The bridge itself now registered elevated levels. Warriors moved with the slow, deliberate grace of men who knew they were already carrying death in their blood. Kvost stood at the center of it all, unyielding, yet the weight of every injured crewman pressed on him like the gravity of a dying star. Morak returned from the torpedo bay, eyes hard. "The crew has done all that honor demands, Captain," he said quietly, for Kvost's ears alone. "But if we lose the core now, the warheads will detonate, and we will take half this sector with us. The Empire will call it a glorious end. I call it waste." Kvost's gaze flicked to the main viewer, where long-range sensors, still partially functional on passive mode, had picked up an unusual signature at the nebula's far edge. A dark, swirling region of space, faint readings suggesting an anomaly that seemed to draw residual heat toward it like a cosmic sink. No gravity well, no event horizon, just a natural phenomenon the science officer identified as a rare thermo-sink vortex, a pocket of subspace where entropy bled away heat at an astonishing rate. Dangerous, unpredictable. The ship would grow bitterly cold if they lingered too near, hull plating contracting, systems protesting. But it might, just might, pull enough thermal energy from their overheating reactor to stabilize the core without further loss of life. Kvost studied the readings for a long moment, the bridge lights painting his face in shifting crimson and violet. The decision crystallized. "Helm," he rumbled at last, "plot a course for the thermo-sink anomaly. We will skirt the abyss. Captain's log, stardate 42432.8. The Draken Nebula had grown quiet around us once more, its ionized veils parting like curtains after a long, somber play. Lieutenant Davidson's shuttle had maintained its distant vigil, feeding us passive sensor data in real time. The Daqtagh's energy signature had shifted dramatically. Reactor output erratic, hull temperature dropping in patches as if the ship itself were drawing inward against some unseen chill. Na'vi confirmed the readings matched the thermo-sink vortex we had catalogued earlier. A rare subspace phenomenon, not unlike the quantum singularities studied in the Beta Quadrant, but instead of gravity, it siphoned thermal energy across a broad spectrum. No event horizon, no crushing tides, just an inexorable bleed of heat into higher dimensional layers. Dangerous, uncharted, exactly the sort of desperate gamble a Klingon captain might embrace when pride and survival collided. We watched. We did not interfere. The Pequod's logs, now sealed under Starfleet Directive 47 Alpha, captured every detail for the archives. What unfolded aboard the IKS Daqtagh in those final hours was not Federation business, yet it deserved to be remembered, not as a tale of glory or defeat, but as the quiet, grinding honor of warriors facing the fire they had lit themselves. But winter was coming. On the bridge of the IKS Daqtagh, the view screen showed the thermosync vortex as a dark, swirling bruise against the nebula's violet backdrop. Subtle at first, then unmistakable as the Daqtagh's forward sensors painted it in false color overlays. The anomaly measured barely 300 kilometers across, its boundaries shimmering with faint Cherenkov radiation where heat bled away. Captain Qapla gripped the arms of the command chair, his breath already fogging slightly in the lowering cabin temperature. The ship's environmental controls, tied to the main EPS grid that ran through the wing root plasma conduits, were struggling to compensate. Klingon Birds of Prey were engineered for endurance, not luxury. Their life support systems drew directly from the auxiliary fusion generators slung beneath the command module. But those generators were now starved of stable power while the main MA reactor in the neck pit fought its own slow death. "Helm," Qapla rumbled, voice steady as duranium plate. "Take us in. 1/4 impulse. Maintain attitude relative to the vortex core. Engineering, reroute all non-critical power to structural integrity fields. I want the hull plating tight." Morak stood at tactical, arms crossed, the fresh burns on his left arm gleaming under the crimson bridge lights. "Captain, the vortex will pull heat faster than our shields can buffer. Internal temperatures could drop below freezing in the outer sections within minutes. The port wing disruptor banks are already showing microfractures from the earlier photon feedback. We risk embrittlement." Qapla did not turn. "And the alternative is a core breach that turns this ship into a second sun. The Empire does not remember cowards, Commander. It remembers those who stared into the abyss and made it blink." The helmsman keyed the course. The Daqtagh surged forward, her massive wings, each housing a primary warp coil assembly integrated directly into the plasma manifold, flexing slightly under the inertial dampers. Unlike Federation starships with their elegant nacelles, the Qapla class was built like a predator. Compact, brutal, the warp field generated by those swept wings themselves. The design sacrificed redundancy for raw power. The tritium intermix regulators fed straight into the central reactor pit with minimal buffer tanks, so it was efficient in battle. In crisis, it was unforgiving. As the ship crossed the anomaly's outer boundary, the cold arrived like a silent enemy. Deck plates groaned with thermal contraction. Condensation beaded on overhead conduits and froze into delicate rime. The bridge temperature plummeted 20 degrees in under a minute. Warriors at their stations pulled their heavy leather jackets tighter, breath pluming visibly. One burly security officer at the aft console muttered, voice thick with gallows humor. "By Kales, it's colder than a Ferengi's heart after a bad deal. I'd rather fight a pack of Targs on Konos ice fields. At least I can bite back." His companion, a scarred gunner, gave a low chuckle that turned into a shiver. "Speak for yourself. I fought Romulans in the Btreka Nebula. At least they shot at you. This cold just sneaks up and steals your fire." The bridge crew shared a brief, rough laugh. Klingon gallows wit, the kind that kept morale from freezing solid. Qapla allowed it. Even he felt the chill seeping into his ridges. But the reactor was not done fighting. The makeshift coolant loop, hastily welded from spare deuterium feed tubing and patched with force field emitters along the starboard wing root manifold, began to weep again. Superheated plasma hissed through microfractures, raising core temperature in defiance of the vortex's pull. Alarms wailed. Then, deeper in the forward torpedo bay, residual heat from the earlier fire ignited a pocket of volatile propellant residue near the experimental warp breaker racks. Radiation levels continued their merciless climb. The vortex had bought them time, but not enough. Irradiated steam from the leaking coolant now seeped through the ventilation grid, carrying gamma and neutron traces into every compartment. Warriors moved slower, voices hoarse, skin flushing with the first signs of exposure. Ensign Daqtagh stood at the engineering station, watching the core temperature creep upward again despite the cold. The young officer's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the knowledge of what must come next. Two officers, Lieutenant K. Rock, the weapons master, and Ensign T-Vac from security, had seen enough. They drew disruptors in a sudden, desperate motion. "This is madness," K. Rock snarled, pistol leveled at Kavost. "You have killed us all with your ambition. We demand you relinquish command. The crew will not follow a captain who trades our lives for house politics." T-Vac backed him, ridges flushed with radiation fever. "The core will breach. Better to die with honor than follow a fool into the cold." Chaos erupted. Warriors rose. Morak moved like lightning. He did not draw his own weapon. Instead he spoke, voice calm and cutting. "Lower your pistols, brothers. You disgrace the blood you carry. The captain has led us this far. If you fire on the Empire itself." With a feint and a wrist lock honed in 100 melees, Morak disarmed K-Rock, then turned the weapon on T-Vac. The mutineers were stunned, bound, and dragged to the brig by loyal crew in under a minute. No shots fired, no blood spilled on the deck, only the quiet, seething respect of warriors who recognized the line they had crossed. Kavost stood unmoved through it all. He did not yet know that Ensign Daqtagh had slipped away during the confrontation. The young officer had taken a radiation suit, patched and already compromised, and entered the reactor crawlway alone. The access tube ran parallel to the main plasma manifold, its walls glowing cherry red from residual heat. Daqtagh crawled on his belly, tools clenched in blistered hands, the suit's seals failing one by one. He reached the primary tritium intermix regulator, a heavy duranium valve controlling the flow of matter and antimatter into the dilithium matrix. With the control rods already inserted, the only hope was a manual bypass. Reroute the leaking coolant through an auxiliary EPS conduit normally reserved for the cloaking devices, phase modulators. It was a desperate, jury-rigged solution that would strain the grid, but it might hold. On the bridge, unaware, Kavost turned to Morak. "The crew has followed me into the fire. They will follow me into the cold. Announce it. We dive deeper. If the core breaches here, the explosion could be read as an attack on the Federation border. Better we die trying than let fear claim us." Morak keyed the ship-wide intercom. His voice carried the weight of conviction. "All hands. This is the first officer. The captain has chosen the path of warriors. We go deeper into the vortex. Stand ready. Qapla." A ragged cheer answered, hoarse, defiant, proud. The Daqtagh pushed forward, wings creaking, internal temperatures plummeting further as the anomaly drank greedily. Frost formed on the view screen edges. The deck plates grew slick. Then the comm crackled. Daqtagh's voice, weak but triumphant. "Engineering to bridge. Bypass complete. Core temperature falling. Intermix stable. We did it." Kavost's head snapped up. "Daqtagh, where are you?" No answer, only the faint sound of labored breathing. Qapla was moving before the echo died. He tore off his jacket, grabbed a second radiation suit, and plunged into the access tube himself. The crawlway was a nightmare of heat and cold, warring in the same space, superheated steam one moment, freezing vapor the next. He found the ensign slumped against the regulator housing, blinded by radiation, skin blistered black, but the valve reset. The core had stabilized. No breach. Kavost dragged him out, hand over hand, grunting with the effort, the young officer's weight heavy as a fallen comrade. They emerged onto the deck together, Daqtagh barely conscious. Medical teams, those still able, rushed forward. The ensign would live, though the cost to his eyes and lungs would be permanent. A meltdown had been prevented, but victory tasted of ash. Irradiated steam now permeated every deck. The ship was a tomb of slow death. 27 warriors would succumb in the days that followed. Some on the bridge, some in the wings, some still at their posts. The rest carried the poison in their blood like a badge. Long-range sensors finally flickered back to life as the makeshift antenna repair held. A Klingon Vorcha-class cruiser, the IKS Konos Honor, answered their distress beacon. It arrived under cloak, decloaking at close range, weapons hot. The captain's orders were terse. Remain aboard the Daqtagh. Confine all crew until a medical freighter could arrive from the border outpost. No evacuation, no risk of spreading contamination to the fleet. Kavost stood on the bridge, surrounded by the dying and the defiant. He looked once at Morak. Then he opened the channel himself. "This is Captain Kavost. We are evacuating. All hands to transporter rooms and shuttles. The Daqtagh will be towed, but her crew will not die chained to her decks. That is my final order." The Vorcha captain protested. Kavost cut the channel. Warriors moved, some carried, some walking under their own power. The Penrose's sensors recorded the mass transporter signatures as the crew transferred. Pequod relayed the data home. Starfleet Command was notified. The Khitomer Accords held. No incident escalated. The Daqtagh was towed back to Konos under heavy guard. Kavost was arrested the moment his boots touched the landing pad. A military tribunal convened within hours. Charges: endangering the mission, disobeying a direct order from Fleet Command, reckless use of experimental weaponry. The courtroom was stark. Stone walls, blood-wine-red banners, the eyes of High Council observers cold as the vortex they had escaped. Morak took the stand. His uniform still bore the burns from the torpedo bay. His voice never wavered. Captain Kavost did not seek glory for himself alone. He sought it for the Empire. When the Corps failed, he chose the cold over surrender. When mutiny threatened, he held the line. When the final repair was needed, he crawled into the fire himself to save a subordinate. If that is treason, then every warrior who ever faced death for the Empire stands guilty. The tribunal deliberated. Kavost was acquitted of the most severe charges. Political connections still carried weight, but he would never command again. The surviving crew were sworn to secrecy under penalty of dishonor. The warp breaker project was quietly shelved. The Daqtagh herself was placed in dry dock for decontamination, her wings scarred, her reactor pit a monument to near catastrophe. Personal log, Captain Sean McMurray. The Hall of the Fallen sat on a windswept ridge overlooking the first city, its stone arches open to the sky so that the spirits of the honored dead could hear the wind sing. A small gathering had assembled, those who could still walk. 27 empty helmets rested on a low altar of black marble, each etched with a name and the simple glyph for warrior. Blood wine had been poured into heavy goblets. Torches flickered, casting long shadows across ridged faces still flushed with radiation. Kavost stood at the center, uniform stripped of rank insignia, face gaunt but unbowed. Morak was at his right shoulder. Radek, bandaged, eyes covered by a medical visor, stood supported by 2 crewmates. The rest formed a ragged circle, some leaning on canes fashioned from broken batleths. Kavost raised his goblet. His voice carried across the hall, rough but clear. "I nominated each of our fallen brothers for the Order of the Batleth, the highest honor the Empire bestows. They told me it is reserved for combat veterans only, not for those who died proving a weapon that might one day save the Empire from its enemies." He paused, the wind whipping his cloak. What good are honors from such people? He looked around the circle, eyes meeting every survivor's. To the 27 who gave their lives so we might stand here. to the cold that tried to claim us and failed, and to the fire we carry still. Qapla! The warriors roared as one, voices raw, goblets raised to the sky. They drank, the wind carried the toast across the ridge. And for a moment the nebula's distant glow seemed to answer, violet and green, slow-burning, eternal. Here on the Penrose, light years away, I close my log with a quiet thought. The stars do not care for politics or pride. They simply burn with passion and violence. And somewhere out there, in the vast cold voids that stretch between them, proud warriors do the same.